Hello world, this is Sign of the Star and welcome to Redemption Deck Building. Now, I know I kind of built up deck building in the last video as some sort of impossible feat, but it's not. It's really not. There are a lot of rules to learn, but anyone can build a redemption deck. The trick, of course, is building a deck well, which takes time and practice. But before you can do that, you need to know the rules, so enough with the rambling, let's do this. First up is deck size. Your redemption deck can be anywhere from 50 cards to 154 cards. Because the likelihood of drawing a given card is better when your deck is smaller, most players will try to keep their decks as close to 50 cards as they can. A 50-card deck must have 7 Lost Souls in it. For every 7 cards above 50 that your deck has, you must add another Lost Soul. So a 56-card deck still needs 7 souls, but as soon as you hit 57, you have to have 8 souls. A 64-card deck must have 9, a 71-card deck must have 10, all the way up to a 154-card deck, which would need a whopping 21 Lost Souls. This way, no matter how large your deck is, the concentration of Lost Souls stays almost exactly the same. The number of sights and dominance in your deck cannot exceed the number of Lost Souls. A 50-card deck must have 7 Lost Souls, so it can have no more than 7 sights and no more than 7 dominance. The number of characters, enhancements, fortresses, artifacts, covenants, and curses is unlimited, so you can have as many of those as you like. However, there is one big rule of thumb regarding the cards in your deck. You can only have 1 copy of any card with a special ability for every 50 cards in your deck. That applies to everything. Souls, sights, characters, enhancements, fortresses, artifacts, everything. So unless you decide to run a deck of 100 cards or more, you can only have a single copy of every single card you have that has a special ability, which, by the way, will be just about every card in your deck. Now, maybe you think you'll be clever, run a deck of 154 cards and run 3 copies of all your cards. Congratulations, that will work for most things. But there's another rule. No matter how gigantic you make your deck, there are 3 kinds of cards that you can only ever have 1 copy of, no matter what. Lost Souls with special abilities, cards that belong to more than 1 brigade, and dominance. If you know anything about dominance, you know why. But for all of your characters and enhancements that do not have special abilities, you may always have 3 of them in your deck, regardless of its size. And you can have any number of a given soul or sight without a special ability, provided that you don't have more sights than souls as per the previous rule. Now there's one other little rule regarding a certain characteristic of character cards. A characteristic, if you will. All characters are either generic or unique. A generic character card represents someone unspecific, like Angel of His Presence, Faithful Priest, and Prophets of Samaria. There are many angels, faithful priests, and prophets of Samaria, and since these cards don't specify which ones they're referring to, these characters are generic. Conversely, a unique character card represents someone specific, like Isaiah, King Saul, and the chief priests. There were many chief priests throughout Israel's history, but the card title begins with the word "the," meaning this card is referring to a very specific group of priests, the ones that gather in John chapter 11, verse 47. Any character whose name begins with "the" is unique. During a game, you cannot control more than 1 unique card that represents the same person, because, there wasn't any cloning in the Bible. But when you're building a deck, you can have multiple copies of unique cards that represent the same person, provided that they belong to different brigades. For example, remember Jethro? Jethro refers to a specific person, so he is unique. This is the Jethro from the 10th anniversary starter deck called the G deck. A year later, he was reprinted in the Priests expansion, where they put him in Teal, the new priestly brigade. The cards are otherwise identical, but because they come from different brigades, you can have one of each copy for every 50 cards in your deck. Now, generic characters, on the other hand, have a different rule. You can have one generic character for each card art variant of the card that exists. Yeah, I'm not even joking. In Redemption, not only is the art amazing, but it also matters. Remember Pharisees and Sadducees? Note the distinct lack of the word "the" in their card titles. These cards do not refer to any particular Pharisees or Sadducees, so they are generic. There are 3 different card art variants of Pharisees, and there are 4 variants of Sadducees, so you could include one of each variant for every 50 cards in your deck. Alright, cool. That's it. You now know how to build a deck in Redemption. But technically, we're not done. See, all the rules we've been looking at are for the most common format of Redemption called Type 1. However, there is also a second format of Redemption called Type 2. Now, before you blow a gasket, the in-game rules of Type 1 and Type 2 are identical, with one major exception. Type 2 games are played to 7 souls instead of 5. And the reason for that is because the deck building rules for Type 2 are very different from those in Type 1. Here's the first really big difference. Type 2 decks are gigantic. The minimum deck size, minimum, mind you, is 100 cards, and the amount of souls in your deck is proportionally the same as in Type 1. Now you know why Type 2 games are played to 7 souls. Everything in Type 2 is bigger. The maximum deck size is 252 cards. People literally bring their Type 2 decks wrapped together with rubber bands just to keep them in one piece. This format is ridiculous. The second really big difference is that the number of good cards and the number of evil cards in a Type 2 deck must be exactly the same. The sum total of your heroes, good enhancements, covenants, good fortresses, and good dominants must exactly equal the sum total of your evil characters, evil enhancements, curses, evil fortresses, and evil dominants. Cards belonging to multiple alignments count as neutral alongside all of your lost souls, sites, and artifacts. So they don't count towards either side when counting the amount of good and evil cards in your deck. And then there's the third really big difference. In Type 2, you get to have a lot more copies of cards. Here's how it works. Lost Souls. If it has a special ability, you can have 2 per deck. If it doesn't, you can have as many as you like. Characters and Enhancements. 4. That's right, 4 copies per deck. Remember how you only got 1 in Type 1 without making your deck huge? Well, in Type 2, you get to have 4. However, if it has 2 brigades, you can only have 2 copies. And if it has more than that, you only get 1. Sites. If it has a special ability, you can still only have 1 copy for every 50 cards in your deck. If it doesn't, you can have 4 per deck, which is actually fewer than you could have in Type 1, which is actually weird. Fortresses, artifacts, covenants, and curses. You get 3 of these per deck, but here's the trick. Covenants and curses are also enhancements, so they still have to obey the enhancement rules. Therefore, if your covenant or curse has 2 brigades, you only get 2, and if it has more than that, you only get 1. And last but not least, dominance. You still get only 1 copy of a dominant per deck. Yup, that's still a rule, even in Type 2. If you know anything about dominance, you know why. Oh, and by the way, the number of your sites and the number of your dominants still has to be equal to or less than the number of lost souls in your deck. So now you know how to build a redemption deck. I wasn't kidding when I said there were a lot of rules, but it's not the end of the frith.
Incoming new expansion.
Ladies and gentlemen, later this spring, the latest Redemption set Revelation of John will be gracing the world with its release. The cards have recently been spoiled, and not a moment too soon for this video, because there has been an addition to the deck building rules of Redemption. Don't panic. It's actually really cool. In addition to your deck, you may now have an extension of your deck called the Reserve. You do not have to shuffle your Reserve, and you can look at it at any time. It stays out of play with your deck. The only rules for the Reserve are these. You can have a maximum of 10 cards in your Reserve, you cannot have any Lost Souls or Dominance in your Reserve, and if you were to put your deck and Reserve together, they would still have to be a legal deck excluding the Lost Soul rule. In other words, you still have to follow all of the rules that we've gone over in this video and apply them to your Reserve as if it was still a part of your deck, but you don't count the cards in your Reserve when determining how many Lost Souls you need in your deck. Basically, you get 10 extra cards to have by your side. You only get to take cards out of a Reserve when the special ability on a card lets you, and since this is a brand new addition to the game, only cards from the new set are going to have ways to access the Reserve. But the ones that do are already so cool, and in time, more and more cards will target the Reserve, and it'll be even cooler. Anyway, now we're done. I swear, there are a lot of rules, but it's not the end of the world. When you're making your first Redemption deck, just watch this video piece by piece, nice and slow, and make note of all of the rules and exceptions. Before you know it, it'll come naturally. And don't be frustrated when your deck doesn't work out the way you planned. Deck building is an art, and just like painting or music, practice makes the artist. Now, it's high time that we see how a game of Redemption really goes down. If you're ready, hit up the next link. Until we meet again, this is SignoftheStar, signing off.